RED Plus is an initiative aimed at reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation through a market-based mechanism, basically by giving a monetary value to carbon sequestered and stored by forests. I should like to emphasize the plus behind the RED, which refers to activities related to the sustainable management of forests, as well as the conservation of biodiversity and the enhancement of carbon stocks through other activities such as afforestation or reforestation. And the focus of our activities actually refers to this plus behind RED, so the RED plus.
And this is a project that has been underway for a number of years, but you are going to be coming here next week and presenting what your findings on how it's been operating so far.
Well, actually, we want to shed light on one particular aspect of RED Plus, and that is the relation between carbon and biodiversity. IUFRO is a member of the Collaborative Partnership on Forests, which is a partnership of 14 leading international organizations dealing with forests and trees in one way or the other. IUFRO coordinates one initiative of that CPF, that partnership, which is called the Global Forest Expert Panels. GFAP, the Global Forest Expert Panels, could be described as some kind of an IPCC for forests. Yeah. So basically the mechanism is to assemble panels of scientists from all around the world who have outstanding expertise on particular issues of high concern. This is the third assessment to be carried out, scientific assessment to be carried out by GFAP, and the theme is biodiversity, forest management and RED Plus. The assessment was initiated about a year ago, so it's a rather short timeline. And the first results will be presented here where are we here?
In Hyderabad.
Will be presented here in Hyderabad next week, next Tuesday. So a global assessment, 50 scientists were involved in that assessment.
And tell me a bit about the relationship between carbon and biodiversity, which you mentioned. It seems quite an ambiguous relationship when you say it like that, but can you sort of break it down for us?
Right. Actually, of course, as you know, forests host the majority of the terrestrial biodiversity, and the vast part of that can be found in tropical forests. That is why, and RED Plus mainly refers obviously to tropical forests. That is why biodiversity conservation is so relevant in the context of RED Plus. Most ecosystems, forest ecosystems basically provide both. They conserve biodiversity, but they also store and sequester carbon. Of course, that balance can be influenced by management interventions. And what these scientists did is they looked at different types of management interventions and how these impact on, the balance between carbon and biodiversity. The simple starting point has been that by reducing deforestation, which is the core objective of RED Plus, you do both. You maintain biodiversity, you conserve biodiversity, and you also make sure that the carbon stays in the forest, basically. But then, of course, I refer to the plus, and the plus, of course, includes several, possible management interventions, and these have an influence on the amount of carbon that is sequestered and the relation to biodiversity. And the key finding of the assessment was that actually it's a rather complex matter, since it involves different time scales and also geographical scales. Whereas you may, for example, through the establishment of a protected forest area, succeed in conserving biodiversity and also maintaining the carbon stock in a given forest area, there may be, in a way, what scientists refer to as leakage, detrimental effects in other areas. For example, by increasing pressure of the population, and using other forest areas and so on. And these kinds of complex relations and interactions have been studied thoroughly in that assessment report.
And I guess a final question, from the perspective of the IUFRO, International Union of Forest Research Organisations, forests have seemed to have become really a major part of the agenda, particularly from the environmental perspective in the last few years. But if this were a football game, it strikes me you're coming into half time and you're losing about 6 or 7-0. I mean, how would you assess the way that the world's forests are looking, and what's your half-time team talk? How can you really get back out there and start increasing the coverage of forests around the world?
Well, I must confess I like the metaphor of the football team, because we have used that same one in a study that was published last year, which looked at international forest governance. And what became very obvious that, the number of players on the field has increased significantly, and the ways they move is rather uncoordinated. So in my view, this is the biggest challenge of our times, to have a more coherent, consistent international forest governance architecture, to improve interinstitutional, intersectoral coordinations, since obviously all key forest problems are of a cross-sectoral nature. with deforestation being the classical example, but there are many, many more. And today we are here to discuss issues related to agroforestry, which obviously also cuts clearly across both forest and agriculture sectors. So I would argue we are doing rather well, but there are quite many players on the field and they should move in a more coordinated manner.